In the first lesson of this unit, we're just going to be looking at some terminology and the way things are set up with statistics. So we're going to be focusing on populations versus samples and also types of statistical studies. So in class, you were assigned the first 2 pages as reading. Here's the bottom of the reading assignment. So the video, if you haven't read yet, make sure you read those 2 pages, and then we'll work through the lesson together starting on page 3. So on this page, we have a word bank and then some questions based on that reading. The first one says a statistical blank is used to collect quantitative information from a specific population. That is a survey. The next question says in a blank, the researcher will separate the subjects into groups, with one group established as the blank and the other and one or more as the 2 more blanks. So this has to do with separating our subjects into 2 groups. That talks about an experimental study or a controlled experiment. So that's here. So a survey, you guys know what a survey is something that people fill out. In a controlled experiment, we're actually taking people and splitting them into 2 groups, one that doesn't get any sort of treatment, and that's called the control group. And for most of the stuff we do in this class, there'll be one experimental group, which is the next one where some sort of change is made. And this hopefully is familiar to you from science. The next question, in a blank, the sample population being studied is measured as it is. So unlike a controlled experiment where we do some sort of manipulation to that experimental group, an observational study, we just observe what's going on. So that is question 3. So let me just cross out the ones we've used. So those are our 3 types of ways that we do studies. We can do surveys, controlled experiments, or observational studies. The next one, blank, is concerned with the collection and analysis of data. That is the topic of our unit, which is statistics. The problem with blank is that they may not truly represent the population. So it's often really difficult to survey or do an experiment on an entire population or observe an entire population. So we take samples. So the problem with samples, where we take parts of the population, but we really have to be sure that they represent the population, and that's a major focus in this unit. When a sample is not random, a blank is introduced, which may influence the study in favor of one outcome over other outcomes. So if we don't get that random sample, a bias is introduced where it could really impact, and our results wouldn't really represent the facts about the whole population. So a good sample must represent the whole population, be large enough to be effective, and be randomly selected to eliminate bias. Looking at our next page, that was our reading review. We're going to answer more applied questions for these topics. So exercise 1. Suppose you are a campaign manager for your friend who is running for senior class president. You would like to know what proportion of students would vote for her if the election were held today. The class is too big to ask everyone, 314 students. What would you do? Okay, so we have comment on whether or not each of the following sampling procedures should be used and explain why or why not. So one thing to do is poll everyone in your friend's math class. Now that's pretty convenient because they're all in one room, but the people in your friend's math class, like at Saugerties, we have tracked math classes, so there are certain types of people, they're not really representing the whole population. If you picked one math class, also the people in your friend's math class might know her better than the general population of students. So we're going to say no. This group contains bias. Because they are more likely to know your friend. And when we say that more likely to know your friend, that's compared to the population of the 314 students in the class. Assign every student in the senior class a number from 1 to 314, then use a random number generator to select 30 students to poll. So this one looks good, right? We're randomly selecting them. We have a decent sized group, usually like 1/10 of the population is okay. So this would be yes. Each student has an equal chance of being selected. So we're going to say for the size of the population, this is a sufficiently large sample, so that one looks good. Ask each student that is going through the lunch line in the cafeteria who they will vote for. So this one I'm just going to kind of talk through. You can write down what you would like. That's not an awful way to do things. There could be some sort of bias. Most people do have lunch, especially with the way things are set up now where you have to have a lunch period, but maybe the one lunch period versus the other lunch period has different types of students. You're only going to get students that buy lunch. Maybe they have different qualities than students that bring their lunch. So this is like an okay method, better than A, but not as good as B. Okay, so something like that for C would be a good answer. Looking at exercise 2, for each of the following study descriptions, identify whether the study is a survey, an observational study, or an experiment. So this is down to those 3 different types of statistical studies. First one, a study investigated whether boys are quicker at learning video games than girls. 20 randomly selected boys and 20 randomly selected girls played a video game that they had never played before. The time it took them to reach a certain level of expertise was recorded. Now this one's tricky because there are kind of 2 groups, but no manipulation is happening. Okay, so we didn't randomly assign the people to groups. They randomly selected the boys and girls, but they were put in groups based on boys or girls. There was no manipulation done to them. They were just observed. Okay, so there was nothing that we did to like teach one group and not teach the other group. So this one is still actually an observational study. We're just watching and seeing what happens. As your statistics project, you collect data by posting 5 questions on poster board around the classroom and recording how your classmates respond to them. So this is a pretty straightforward survey. We're just asking questions and having people answer them. And then the last one, a study determines whether taking aspirin regularly helps to prevent heart attacks. A large group of male physicians of comparable health were randomly assigned equally to take an aspirin every day or to take a placebo, which means that it was a fake pill. Assuming with a placebo that the people did not know which one they were taking. After several years, the proportion of the males who had suffered heart attacks in each group was compared. So we definitely have manipulation. The manipulation is aspirin for the one random group versus the placebo for the other group. So this is an experiment. Experimental study, either one's fine.